Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford.
And I'm Dalton Gentry.
And we are here for serious business.
Serious business?
Very serious.
What is this serious business we're here for?
Reviewing poetry.
That is serious business. I don't know if I would say this poem is serious business, but we'll get there.
Oh, no, this sucks.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, at least we're on the same page with that. We are reviewing today First Snow, a poem by Mary Oliver. This would be my first experience with Mary Oliver. Have you read any before?
I read the library at which I was housed while I was getting my master's degree had a bunch of poetry compared to a normal library. And I read through two of her collections.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I tried. I had to try. Mary Oliver's a big name. So, of course, I blame myself first. But not second.
So you got through one. One's acceptable.
Yeah.
You went back for seconds.
And this is First Snow.
Yeah.
Second Snow, I'm blaming you, Mary.
So are we going to read this full poem in its entirety? We're going to read the poem here. We are going to have three good things, three bad things.
Best line.
A best line from the poem. I even marked
Full
that.
literary analysis.
Literary analysis, rating and review.
Recommendation.
So close. You want to go first?
You go first.
Oh, no. By all means. Give me a second. Go on.
I need to take a nap.
Please go first.
The snow began here this morning, and all day continued its white rhetoric everywhere, calling us back to why, how, whence such beauty, and what the meaning, such an oracular fever. Flowing past windows, an energy it seemed would never ebb, never settle, less than lovely, and only now, deep into night, it has finally ended. The silence is immense, and the heavens still hold a million candles. Nowhere the familiar things, stars, the moon, the darkness we expect, and the night turn from. Trees glitter like castles of ribbons. The broad fields smolder with light, and a passing creek bed lies heaped with shining hills. And though the questions that have assailed us all day remain, not a single answer has been found. Walking out now into the silence and the light under the trees and through the fields feels like one.
Okay. That's a thing.
What happened?
First Snow. The snow began here this morning and all day continued, its white rhetoric everywhere, calling us back to why, how, whence, such beauty and what the meaning, such an oracular fever, flowing past windows, an energy it seemed would never ebb, never settle less than lovely. And only now, deep into night, it has finally ended. The silence is immense, and the heavens still hold a million candles. Nowhere the familiar things, stars, the moon, the darkness we expect and nightly turn from. Trees glitter like castles of ribbons. The broad fields smolder with light. A passing creek bed lies heaped with shining hills, and though the questions that have assailed us all day remain, not a single answer has been found. Walking out now into the silence and the light under the trees and through the fields feels like one. Okay. Mary Oliver, ladies and gentlemen.
Three good things. Number one, this is a clean poem.
Go on.
What? It's clean.
Go on.
Number two, I can imagine this. If we talk about poems, we talk about poetry, we talk about emotionality, I can imagine this poem having a calming effect on someone.
Okay.
And three, congratulations, Dalton, you've read Mary Oliver.
I'm so proud of myself. This is what I hate. Not only are we on the same page with something, but the exact same words are used. Number one good thing, this is a very clean poem. Very clean poem. It does flow very smoothly.
I think you just didn't prepare for this, so you're just going to repeat the things I said.
Not only is it
I don't
written
know that you
right
didn't
there,
copy that off my notes while I was reading.
This is in my notebook, my already done notebook. It's a very clean poem. Number two, it is a very approachable poem. If you haven't already built a poetry palette, this is something you could sit down and definitely get a little bit of poetry feeling.
I'm so glad you used the word palette.
What do you think I was going to go with?
Well, because when I get to my three bad things, you'll see.
Okay. And finally, number three, the simplicity of the scenes coupled with this simple setting, it's really quite nice. It's a very easygoing poem.
I think that is deceptively so, though.
Okay.
Did we make... Okay, so besides the congratulations, Dalton, we had the same points, both of them.
Pretty much.
Three bad things. Number one, Mary Oliver looked over the firmament and said, "Let there be insta-poetry." Number two, Exclamation points? Really?
Why not?
And number 3, you know, if Bob Ross were a poet,
If Bob Ross were a poet, it'd be better than this. Let's be honest. I love Bob Ross.
you might look. Bob Ross's paintings
Yeah.
are generic brand Cheerios.
I know.
They're
but
still good.
You should come over one day when we have a Bob Ross night. I think you'd enjoy it. Anyway,
Why does the fact that you have Bob Ross nights not surprise me?
you're doing something wrong in life if you don't binge watch The Joy of Painting while painting along at least once in your life. Call your friends. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
Anyway, 3 bad things. There really isn't a lot to dig into here. It's pretty cut and dry. Number 2, I do question some of the word choices. This feels very much like a draft as opposed to a finished poem. And number 3, what the hell are we accomplishing here?
I think we're going to get into that.
Okay. Do you have a favorite line?
All day continued its white rhetoric everywhere.
That's the favorite line?
Yeah, why?
The silence is immense, and the heavens still hold a million candles.
That's a Bob Ross line if I've ever heard
It
one.
is. We got into an argument when we decided to review this way back when. We've been putting off the review on this for months now because nobody wants to talk about Mary Oliver. And I mentioned the silence of snow. And you question it. It's a thing, man. It is a thing. And that is my number one thing. It is a silence. It is a thing. The silence of snow is absolutely a thing. And that is something I have never seen written in text before. Someone addressing that. When you go out, I don't know if the snow like dampens the air and like constricts the volume or something, but it is quiet.
Well, sound waves aren't going to bounce off.
There you go.
I imagine Gary Paulson at some point described it.
Did he?
I have to imagine.
Well, I didn't read it, and this was the first time I've read something like that, so that is my first point. Good for her for addressing the silence of snow.
Maybe Jack London did.
Do you think so?
Maybe.
The Silence of Snow
Sounds
is
like a Jack
actually
London
the
thing
name
to-
of my forthcoming album, by the way, if you'd like to pick that up. Anyway.
It's an acoustic album.
It is, it is. I actually don't play anything. It's just silence. It's wonderful. Where do you want to start?
I have to believe that there is some meaning behind the began here line break meant to intuit the reader of the snow's significance, but I don't get it.
Okay.
The snow began here this morning and all day. I mean, if you really want to Shatner that out,
You can Shatner it.
yeah. So I just have to believe that somewhere in that little grouping of lines, there is some emphasis, so the example I always use and give, I died for beauty but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. I died for beauty but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. Putting the emphasis on for versus I died for beauty changes the emphasis. So I died for beauty suggests that your death is not inevitable in that situation, that your death was not called for, but you did it anyway. I died for beauty suggests that everyone dies for something.
Okay.
You chose beauty, right?
Okay.
So the little emphasis differences between words, and that poem, I Died for Beauty, is brilliant for that. You can go through that poem and break it down and emphasize one word, any word, in that entire poem, and it's going to change something structurally. I don't get that here.
Okay. The layout of a poem has always been something that's baffled me. Now, this is coming from Literature Portable Anthology, 2nd edition, which is quite possibly the greatest text we have ever bought.
Yeah.
We bought this for our undergrad in college and still use it to this day. This is glorious.
Indispensable to the point where I will be reading during this review 2 other poems that occur in this
Absolutely.
text.
So, pick this up. But the choice of how a poem is laid out has always been something that baffles me because obviously there is meaning there. You can always find meaning in the formatting of a poem. With this, it genuinely feels like Mary Oliver was just wanting to shorten it, give it a bit of a punch.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be any justification for it. So I will get on board with you there. Despite the Emily Dickinson references, I don't see why that choice was made.
Well, and it really is unfortunate that you're illiterate.
I know. It happens from time to time. Excuse me. Karma.
But you mentioned the structure of the poem.
Okay.
Flowing past windows, we begin indoors. Walking out now into the silence. Is it night? this began in the morning and it ends at night. It began indoors, it ends outdoors.
Okay.
So we've got movement here.
We do.
And I think the best of my interpretation here is that the snow is meant to just represent the static of the day. And while we're looking back at it, it has no real meaning.
Okay.
It seems, the snow, like it's going to be the event of the day. Doesn't it? In this poem. It's titled For Snow.
Okay.
It's all about the snow. But it seems, as we move through it, that there's no real... I didn't pick up any deeper meaning for the snow, did you?
No.
So if it is meant to represent just the static of the day, this poem then becomes representative of the fact that the things that seem big at the time are meaningless in retrospect.
Okay.
And there's almost no way to conceptualize that while they're happening. First snow, so big. What happens here? We move. We're moving around.
Okay.
We're talking about the snow, but the snow's not really impacting things besides to quiet them.
Okay.
It's bright, it's something to look at, and it dulls everything else.
We move very gracefully throughout this poem from a very simple physical scene in the beginning to almost a dreamlike wandering at the end. And you really don't notice it, but you do kind of transgress or to transcend right into that. I kind of like that idea of the the static of the day, because we do get the line, the questions that have assailed us all day remain. Not a single answer has been found.
Exactly.
When you wake up in the morning, you notice the snow and you acknowledge the snow, but it's not until the night when the day has calmed down that you appreciate the snow. I can tell you many times I've stepped outside and appreciated the silence of that snow, and hey, it's really pretty out here. It's always been at night. There's something magical about that. And I think Mary Oliver very successfully captures that very physical scene at the beginning, the snowfall itself, and transcends into that dreamlike wonder of the night scene.
Well, I think that this is aided by the sheer necessity of snow. So it begins at the morning.
Okay.
It ends at night. What do we have in between? We don't get much mention between, do we?
We don't?
Because the winter days are very short.
Okay.
Right? So we're sort of necessitated into this flow of losing the entire day.
Okay.
Which sort of speaks back into the static of the day is what seems big when you're doing it, but it's not big in retrospect, and you've lost your day in the process. So the snow seems like a big idea in the morning. We go out to examine it at night, and oh, okay, it's there, but it's not the big deal. And we've already lost the day.
Okay. I think a lot comes back to simplicity as well. Simplicity is something that is very hard to capture, but it's a hot ticket item right now. The idea of living a simple life, a minimalist lifestyle, that's a hot ticket item. I think Mary Oliver captures that pretty decently here. This is a very simple poem. There's not a lot going on here. She's not talking about anything beyond just the snow and how the snow impacts her. And I think that simplicity is well captured. It's hard to do, but it comes across quite nicely in this, if that makes sense.
It does. I am inclined to believe, I am inclined to credit, if simply through her success as a poet, that I am missing something.
Okay.
Versus this just being that simple.
So...
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
We've read through this a few times. We read this twice here just on the channel. I still don't see anything here, and that's one of my bad points. There's not a lot to dig into. With some poets, and like we're big fans of Bukowski, so we'll use Bukowski as an example. Simple word choices open up an entire conversation. Regardless of what we change here, regardless of what we focus on, damn it, it's just a poem about snow. And that comes to my distaste towards nature poets. Every time, even with Robert Frost gets a little more explorative. That's fine. I'm not sure if that's a word. It sounded funny when I said it.
Exploratory.
There you go. With this, I don't see anything else here. I hate to think that I'm missing something, but as much as I grasp, I feel like I'm just trying to put something into the poem that isn't there. There's nothing to dig into with this poem.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned Bukowski.
Okay.
Because the way I feel reading this is how I imagine many people feel reading Bukowski. This world does not appeal to me.
No.
This world does not activate any of my artistic senses. This world does not activate any of my intellectual senses. This world is a Bob Ross painting.
Okay.
This world is just sort of, it's all right to look at.
It's a thing.
I've never known this speaker. I can't really get behind this speaker. And because of those things, I am less inclined to dig for meaning. I'm more likely to judge based on a lack of poetic tools. There's not a lot of poetic tools being put on display here, are there?
No.
Much like Bukowski. And I didn't like Bukowski at first either. I hated Bukowski, but this book includes the first Bukowski poem I ever read, which I didn't know on retro. I was trying to remember this poem forever because I love it so much, and I couldn't remember that it was a Bukowski poem because all the other Bukowski I saw after this, I hated. I thought was terrible. So when I finally refound it in this text, I was so shocked. It's titled My Old Man, and it reads as such. 16 years old, during the Depression, I'd come home drunk, and all my clothing, shorts, shirts, stockings, suitcase, and pages of short stories would be thrown on the front lawn about the street. My mother would be waiting behind a tree. Henry, don't go in. He'll kill you. He's read your short stories. I can whip his ass. Henry, please take this and find yourself a room. But it worried him that I might not finish high school, so I'd be back again. One evening he walked in with pages of one of my short stories, which I had never submitted to him, and he said, "This is a great short story." I said, "Okay." And he handed it to me, and I read it. And it was a short story about a rich man who had a fight with his wife and had gone out in the night for a cup of coffee, and had observed the waitress and the spoons and the forks and the salt and pepper shakers and the neon sign in the window, and then had gone back to his stable to see and touch his favorite horse, who then kicked him in the head and killed him. Somehow, the story held meaning for him, though when I had written it, I had no idea of what I was writing about. So I told him, "Okay, old man, you can have it." And he took it and walked out and closed the door. I guess that's as close as we ever got. I identify with Henry here.
Okay.
I come from that type of household. Not so much the end of the poem where the old man comes in and says, "Good job," but I recognize that scene on the lawn. So this was my in to Bukowski.
Okay.
I read this poem and I said, okay, you know what? This poem really held something for me. There's not a lot of poetic tools on display.
No. It's very cut and dry.
So I'm going to dig deeper, and I'm going to really get in here, and I'm going to play with the soil. And this is how I came to love Bukowski.
Okay.
So I can imagine people finding Mary Oliver through a poem like First Snow, and coming to her that way, understanding this scene. Well, I kind of like snowy days.
Yeah.
I'm willing to search for deeper meaning in here.
And maybe that's what it is with this particular poem, because I will agree with you, Bukowski. I think, oddly enough, in very different parts of Bukowski, we both identify with Bukowski. And that's what really clicks with us. I don't identify anything in this poem with myself.
Right.
The idea of the silence of the snow, I thought that was nice to see that on paper. She paints the picture quite well. I get the picture. But that's all it is for me. It's not bringing anything forward that a Bukowski poem would. So maybe that's what I'm missing with this here. Maybe Mary Oliver just isn't for me. There's nothing wrong with that. But my biggest difficulty with this, and this is why I'm going to harp on this, is even if it isn't for me, I can usually identify why someone would enjoy this or why this would be important to someone. I can't dig anything out of this poem.
And I think that is because, again, of the lack of poetic tools on display.
Maybe that's what it is.
So, a lot of times, say, for instance, Shakespeare sonnets.
Okay.
You weren't a big fan of them, right?
Not particularly.
What were you able to point at?
What do you mean?
I really like the cadence of this poem.
Okay.
I really like this rhyme.
You can find something to appreciate.
Yeah. a lot of those things that you're appreciating end up being poetic tools.
Okay.
So when there's no poetic tools, I'll steal a phrase from pop culture. It's all on a bitch now, right?
Thank you for that.
So when you don't have rhyme, and you don't have cadence, and you don't have structure, and you don't have any of the flowers that we adorn the bouquet of poetry with,
Okay.
it's all on a bitch now. And you better have something in there.
That's the thing. Even at that point, though, when we strip this down, we get rid of all the flowers, we get rid of all the tools that we use, the things that make poetry in the poet's mind. When we strip that down and all you have is the words and the scene, there is still, I think, there is some point that you can say, I understand that, I appreciate that, that's a good move there. Reading this over and over and over, at no point do I find that moment. At no point do I identify with anything. At no point do I say, well, that's clever and insightful. At no point can I find a moment in this poem that is me. This, in my opinion, is not good.
Right. So this is so.
Emily Dickinson. I don't like Emily Dickinson. We've made that very clear on the channel. I can very much appreciate Emily Dickinson and what she does.
Because of the brilliance on display.
Let's go with that. This here, there's just nothing.
Dickinson employs metaphor and simile in a very obvious way.
Okay?
I am not sure the metaphor or simile behind this poem. Like I say, it's all on a bitch now. So it's all on Mary Oliver in this. But here's the thing. A lot of people sure do like Mary Oliver.
They do.
So maybe you're the bitch.
Maybe.
Maybe it's all on a bitch now means you better find the meaning in this because it's there. Right? So, and when I say the bitch is you, I mean you and me, right?
good.
Because
We're good.
I'm not finding much there either. But I'm willing to credit someone who is published and anthologized as voluminously as is Mary Oliver.
When it comes to, it's an interesting thing that we do here because at our base here on Strip Cover Lit, as we strip away all the fancy flowers and all the tools that we use on Strip Cover Lit, leave my beads alone, we get down to, we review things. We basically act as literary critics the best we can. I still cannot find anything in this, and that drives me insane. Everything we come across in this show, there is something I can find. Something I can cling to, something I can find some meaning to. And maybe I'm just missing it altogether. I find the idea of the morning all day continued its white rhetoric everywhere is a little off-putting and a little abrupt.
Well, I wondered if there's something in here about race. You know, white rhetoric.
It would lead to that.
Because we go straight from white rhetoric to who, what, where, when, why. You know what I mean? So it seems to, like if we're going that route, is it a commentary on the Protestant work ethic? White folks never know how to let anything lie. You know what I mean? Like
That's a possibility, but there is nothing to back that up.
Yeah, no, and see, so did I not make a dent with the Static of the Day argument at all?
Static of the Day, maybe, but again, we get a lot of grief every now and then. They say, oh, you're reading too far into this, but that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to read far into something and analyze something and try to find what's there.
It's not necessarily that you're supposed to. That's where we find fun in it.
Yeah.
Right?
We could plug that idea of the Static of the Day in here, and it would work, but it doesn't jump out at me. Usually when you find that niche, that little idea, you can find other evidence. You can build off of that. With that, it fits, it works, but there's nothing to back it up.
And it makes the poem necessary, right?
Okay.
It is, normally when you find exactly what a poem means to you, it becomes the inevitable structure of the poem. And this, even for me, having sort of clawed my way to that interpretation, I don't have that there.
Yeah. I've got nothing else to say about this. I honestly don't. Is there anything else you'd like to point out?
No, but I would like to read my poem for the recommendation once we get there, so
Sure.
It'll take a little bit.
What would you rate Mary Oliver? First note.
Though I did not agree with you about the best line of the poem, I would give this 70 a million candles out of 100.
Okay.
I think this is a flat C grade.
I'm inclined to agree with you. 75. 75 white rhetoric's what I decided to go with because there's something there. It's average.
Well, indeed.
Indeed and so.
Put on your white voice.
I just went double white Dalton here.
This is my white rhetoric voice.
Sorry, I just went double Dalton. Anyway,
Double Dalton is
Double
like
Dalton.
It's like a.
I tried to
jump
go
rope.
high-pitched Dalton, but I tried to do the Adrian impression of high-pitched Dalton. It came out weird and I didn't like it.
It's like a jump rope trick where instead of jumping over both of them at the same time, which is a double Dutch, you just lay down and let the rope spin over you.
That's a double Dalton. That's fine. It's average. It's average. There's not much here. If you like this, Robert Frost, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening.
Yeah, don't underestimate the value of having a clean poem, right? That's not an easy thing to do.
No. God, this is irking me.
I would recommend. Actually, that poem's in here too, isn't it?
It is. This book is amazing. If you don't own this book, buy this book.
It is a treasure trove. Literature, a Portable Anthology, 2nd edition. I don't know how else to identify this. Gardner, Lawn, Riddle, and Shakel. The poem I would recommend is on page 659 of this text. It is Why I Left the Church by Richard Garcia. Maybe it was because the only time I hit a baseball, it smashed the neon cross on the church across the street. Even 25 years later, when I saw Father Harris, I would wonder if he knew that it was me. Maybe it was the demon-stoked rotisseries of purgatory, where we would roast hundreds of years for the smallest of sins. Or was it the day I wore my space helmet to catechism, clear plastic with red and white inflatable rim? Sister Mary Bernadette pointed toward the door and said, "Out! Come back when you're ready." I rose from my chair and kept rising towards the ceiling, while the children screamed, and Sister kept crossing herself. The last she saw of me was my shoes disappearing through the cracked plaster. I rose into the sky and beyond. It was a good thing I am wearing my helmet, as I thought as I floated and turned in the blackness and the brightness of outer space, my body cold on one side, hot on the other. It would have been very quiet if my blood had not been rumbling in my ears so loud. I remember thinking, maybe I will come back when I'm ready. But I won't tell the other children what it was like. I'll have to make something up.
Feels like there's so much more just in one reading.
Yeah, and I'm not making the argument that there's not. I'm not making the argument that they are the same poem. The argument I am making for that as the recommendation for this is that it's one of those poems that is making so much of the small moments of the day that I think this is a getting lost in the static of the day argument as well.
Very well.
Send us out.
So, if you like this kind of thing, make sure you hit the like button down below and subscribe here at Strip Cover Lit. We do poetry reviews from time to time, along with short stories, Let's Read series. We analyze literature, we analyze poetry, a little bit of everything. And if you don't like that, we've got variety hours.
Yeah.
That's what it's there for.
And we're working on putting more and more poetry on the channel.
Absolutely. BookTube needs more poetry.
Hoping to be a little bastion of poetry in the sea of BookTube.
And as always, if you'd like to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit, there's a link as always to our Patreon to be found in the description below.